Hi, Grandma here, and we are reading Tom Sawyer by Mark Twain. And we finished the chapter on him conniving other kids to whitewash his Aunt Polly's fence, which was supposed to be his job. Not only has he connived them into doing it, they have paid him in order to paint the fence. So he has quite a way of talking. He can convince people to do things that they may not want to do. We also found out in an earlier chapter that he has spotted a girl. Becky Thatcher will be her name. Okay, General Tom, Chapter 3. Tom presented himself before Aunt Polly, who was sitting by an open window in a pleasant rearward apartment, which was bedroom, breakfast room, dining room, and library combined. The balmy summer air, the restful quiet, the odor of the flowers, and the drowsing murmur of the bees had their effect, and she was nodding over her knitting, for she had no company but the cat, and it was asleep on her lap. Her spectacles were propped upon her gray head for safety. She had thought that of course Tom had deserted long ago, and she wondered at seeing him place himself in her power again in this intrepid way. He said, "Mayn't I go and play now, Aunt?" "What? Already? How much have you done?" "It's all done, Aunt." "Tom, don't lie to me. I can't bear it." "I ain't, Aunt. It is all done." Aunt Polly placed small trust in such evidence. She went out to see for herself, and she would have been content to find 20% of Tom's statement true. When she found the entire fence whitewashed, and not only whitewashed, but elaborately coated and recoated, and even a streak added to the ground, her astonishment was almost unspeakable. She said, "Well, I never! There's no getting around it. You can work when you have a mind to, Tom." And then she diluted the compliment by adding, "But it's powerful seldom you're a mind to, I'm bound to say. Well, go along and play, but mind you get back sometime in a week or I'll tan you." Now, we've already talked about licking and how licking is getting a beating. Well, here's another word. I'll tan you. And tan you means the same thing, or I will spank you or give you a beating. She was so overcome by the splendor of his achievement that she took him into the closet and selected a choice apple and delivered it to him, along with an improving lecture upon the added value and flavor a treat took to itself when it came without a sin through virtuous effort. And while she closed with a happy scriptural flourish, he hooked a donut. In other words, he swiped a donut. Then he skipped out and saw Sid, his brother, just starting up the outside stairway that led to the back rooms on the second floor. Clods were handy. That's mud clods. And the air was full of them in a twinkling. They raged around Sid like a hailstorm, and before Aunt Polly could collect her surprised faculties and sally to the rescue, 6 or 7 clods had taken personal effect, and Tom was over the fence and gone. There was a gate, but as a general thing, he was too crowded for time to make use of it. His soul was at peace, now that he had settled with Sid for calling attention to his black thread and getting him into trouble. Tom skirted the block and came around into a muddy alley that led by the back of his aunt's cow stable. He presently got safely beyond the reach of capture and punishment and hastened toward the public square of the village where 2, quote, military, unquote, companies of boys had met for conflict, according to a previous appointment. Tom was general of one of the armies. Joe Harper, a bosom friend, best friend, was general of the other. These 2 great commanders did not condescend to fight in person, that being suited to the still smaller fry, but sat together on an eminence and conducted the field operations by orders delivered through the aide-de-camps. Tom's army won a great victory after a long and hard-fought battle. Then the dead were counted, prisoners exchanged, the terms of the next disagreement agreed upon, and the day for the necessary battle appointed, after which the armies fell into line and marched away, and Tom turned homeward alone. As he was passing the house where Jeff Thatcher lived, he saw a new girl in the garden. A lovely little blue-eyed creature with yellow hair plaited into 2 long tails, white summer frock, and embroidered pantalettes. Here's a picture of Becky Thatcher here. And you can see that beneath her skirt, she's wearing some kind of pants. Well, that's pantalettes, and they were usually decorated with ruffles or lace at the bottom, and were supposed to show. The fresh-crowned hero fell without firing a shot. A certain Amy Lawrence vanished out of his heart and left not even a memory of herself behind. He thought he loved her to distraction. He had regarded his passion as adoration, and behold, it was only a poor little evanescent partiality. He had been months winning her. She had confessed hardly a week ago. He had been the happiest and proudest boy in the world, only 7 short days, and here in one instant of time, she'd gone out of his heart like a casual stranger whose visit is done. So when I introduced this, I said he had met Becky Thatcher, but he hadn't yet. That's in this chapter. Sorry. He worshipped this new angel with furtive eye till he saw that she had discovered him. Then he pretended he did not know she was present and began to show off in all sorts of absurd, boyish ways in order to win her admiration. He kept up this grotesque foolishness for some time, but by and by, while he was in the midst of some dangerous gymnastics performances, he glanced aside and saw that the little girl was wending her way toward the house. Tom came up to the fence and leaned on it, grieving and hoping she would tarry yet a while longer. She halted a moment on the steps and then moved toward the door. Tom heaved a great sigh as she put her foot on the threshold, but his face lit up right away, for she tossed a pansy over the fence a moment before she disappeared. The boy ran around and stopped within a foot or 2 of the flower, then shaded his eyes with his hand and began to look down street as if he had discovered something of interest going on in that direction. Presently, he picked up a straw and began trying to balance it on his nose, with his head tilted far back, and as he moved from side to side, in his efforts, he edged nearer and nearer toward the pansy. Finally, his bare foot rested upon it. His pliant toes closed around it, and he hopped away with the treasure and disappeared around the corner. But only for a minute, only while he could button the flower inside his jacket next to his heart, or next to his stomach. He was not much posted in anatomy and not hypercritical anyway. He returned now and hung about the fence till nightfall, showing off as before, but the girl never exhibited herself again, though Tom comforted himself a little with the hope that she had been near some window meantime and been aware of his attention. Finally, he went home reluctantly with his poor head full of visions. All through supper, his spirits were so high that his aunt wondered what had gotten into that child. He took a good scolding about clotting Sid and did not seem to mind it in the least. He tried to steal sugar under his aunt's very nose and got his knuckles rapped for it. He said, "Aunt, why don't you ever whack Sid when he takes it?" "Well, Sid don't torment a body the way you do. You be always into that sugar if I weren't watching you." Frequently she stepped into the kitchen, and Sid, happy in his immunity, reached for the sugar bowl, a sort of glorying over Tom which was well nigh unbearable. But Sid's fingers slipped, and the bowl dropped and broke. Tom was in ecstasies, in such ecstasies that he even controlled his tongue and was silent. He said to himself he would not speak a word even when his aunt came in, but would sit perfectly still till she asked who did the mischief. And then he would tell, and there would be nothing so good in the world as to see that pet model, Sid, catch it. He was so brimful of exultation that he could hardly hold himself when the old lady came back and stood above the wreck, discharging lightnings of wrath from over her spectacles. He said to himself, "Now it's coming." And the next instant, he was sprawling on the floor. The potent palm was uplifted to strike again when Tom cried out, "Hold on! What are you belting me for? Sid broke it." Aunt Polly paused, perplexed, and Tom looked for the healing pity. But when she got her tongue again, she only said, "Well, you didn't get a lick of this, I reckon. You've been into some audacious mischief when I wasn't around like enough." Then her conscience reproached her, and she yearned to say something kind and loving, but she judged that this would be construed into a confession that she had been in the wrong, and discipline forbade that. So she kept silent and went about her affairs with a troubled heart. Tom sulked in a corner and exulted his woes. He knew that in her heart his aunt was on her knees to him, and he was morosely gratified by the consciousness of it. He would hang out, no signals. He would take notice of none. He knew that a yearning glance fell upon him now and then through a film of tears, but he refused recognition of it. He pictured himself lying sick unto death, and his aunt bending over him, beseeching one little forgiving word, but he would turn his face to the wall and die with that word unsaid. Ah, how would she feel then? And he pictured himself brought home from the river, dead, with his curls all wet and his sore heart at rest. How she would throw herself upon him, how her tears would fall like rain, her lips pray to God to give her back her boy, and she would never, never abuse him any more. But he would lie there cold and white, make no sign, a poor little sufferer, his griefs at an end. He so worked upon his feelings with the pathos of those dreams that he had to keep swallowing. He was so like to choke, and his eyes swam in a blur of water which overflowed when he winked, and ran down and trickled from the end of his nose. And such a luxury to him was this petting of his sorrows that he could not bear to have any worldly cheeriness or any grating delight intrude upon it. It was too sacred for such contact, and so presently, when his cousin Mary danced in, all alive with the joy of seeing home again after an age-long visit of 1 week to the country, he got up and moved in clouds and darkness out of one door as she brought song and sunshine in the other. He wandered far from the accustomed haunts of boys and sought desolate places that were in harmony with his spirit. A log raft in the river invited him, and he seated himself on its outer edge and contemplated the dreary vastness of the stream, wishing all the while that he could only be drowned. All at once and unconsciously, without undergoing the uncomfortable routine devised by nature, then he thought of his flower. Oh, he got it out, rumpled and wilted, and it mightily increased his dismal felicity. He wondered if she would pity him. If she knew, would she cry and wish that she had a right to put her arms around his neck and comfort him? Or would she turn coldly away like all the hollow world? This picture brought such an agony of pleasurable suffering that he worked it over and over again in his mind and set it up in new and varied lights till he wore it threadbare. At last he rose up, sighing, and departed in the darkness. About 9:30 or 10, he came along the deserted street to where the adored unknown lived. He paused a minute. No sound fell upon the listening ear. A candle was casting a dull glow upon the curtain of a second-story window. Was that sacred presence there? He climbed the fence, threaded his stealthy way through the plants till he stood under that window. He looked up, long and with emotion. Then he laid him down in the ground under it, disposing himself upon his back, with his hands clasped upon his breast, and holding his poor wilted flower. Thus he would die, out in the cold world with no shelter over his homeless head, no friendly hand to wipe the death damps from his brow, no loving face to bend pityingly over him when the great agony came. And thus she would see him when she looked out upon that glad morning, and oh, would she drop one tear upon his poor lifeless form? Would she leave one little sigh to see a bright young life so rudely blighted, so untimely cut down? The window went up. A maidservant's discordant voice profaned the holy calm, and a deluge of water drenched the prone martyr's remains. Now, back in that time, they didn't have sinks with drains, so they often, especially if they were upstairs, they would just pour the water out the window. The water could have been bathing water, but it could have also been toilet water. Anyway, the strangling hero sprang up with a relieving snort, then was whizzed as a missile in the air, mingled with the murmur of a curse. A sound as of shivering glass followed, and a small, vague form went over the fence and shot away the gloom. Not long after, as Tom, all undressed for bed, was surveying his drenched garments by the light of a tallow dip, Sid woke up. But if he had any dim idea of making any reference to illusions, he thought better of it and held his peace, for there was danger in Tom's eye. Tom turned in with the added vexation of prayers, and Sid made a mental note of the omission. Sid, he's kind of a goody-goody, and Tom is not. The next chapter is called Showing Off. So as if Tom didn't show off enough for the new girl in town, there's going to be more showing off in this next chapter. Bye-bye.